Why was she the only one walking into the briefing room without a word? Everyone else was buzzing, voices bouncing off the sterile concrete walls, tapping pens and shuffling papers like they were rehearsing a play. She carried nothing but a rifle case and a silence that felt heavier than the weight of the world. They'd seen her before, yes, the quiet one, the pilot, the sniper, the operative whose name wasn't whispered so much as acknowledged with a cautious glance. But today, her silence wasn't just a quirk. It was a declaration. She lowered herself into the chair at the end of the long, rectangular table, the one nobody really wanted to sit at. Her eyes scanned the faces around her, some familiar, some new, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Not even when the briefing officer started rattling off intel that she'd already memorized on the helicopter ride over. She let the words wash over her, detached, calculating, measuring. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste, a metallic tang in the air, and yet she breathed calmly. Inside, though, her chest was a storm. Every mission carried ghosts. Every choice could be the one that ended her or, worse, failed someone else. Her name was Captain Mara Ellison. At 28, she had a record that commanded respect on paper, but the truth behind those accolades was far more complicated. She had survived, yes. She had accomplished missions that left others questioning their own limits, but each victory was etched with a personal cost. She had watched comrades die in ways she could never unsee, and each time she carried a piece of them inside her, a constant reminder that silence sometimes spoke louder than strategy, louder than commands. The briefing continued. Drones, foot patrols, extraction points, enemy movement patterns. All the maps were laid out like an intricate puzzle, and she traced each path with the tip of her finger, though no one noticed. Not because they were dismissive, though some certainly were, but because she didn't need acknowledgement. She already knew the patterns. She already knew the risk. And she already knew the part of herself she would be sacrificing again if she stepped into that field. Her teammate, Sergeant Logan, nudged her with an elbow and whispered, "You're scaring the newbies with that look, you know." She didn't smile, didn't turn her head. Logan sighed, shaking his head, muttering under his breath, silent, deadly, and apparently immortal. She didn't respond, but the corner of her mouth twitched, a small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of a shared understanding. In the field, they relied on her, and she relied on them. But there was a boundary, an invisible line she refused to cross. Her pain, her doubts, her regrets, they stayed hers alone. The orders were clear: infiltrate, observe, extract, and if necessary, neutralize. It was a small village in the mountains, strategic, yes, but also treacherous. Mara's fingers drummed on the table, a quiet rhythm, almost meditative, almost like counting heartbeats in a storm. Memories flickered behind her eyes. Her father's voice on the phone before she left for basic training, telling her she had to be strong because no one else would ever understand. The quiet courage of her mother, who had raised 3 children alone while the world seemed intent on forgetting her. The fleeting warmth of home that now felt like another life, distant, almost fictional. She thought about the civilians in the village. They were just as much a part of the mission as the enemy. But there was something Mara had learned, and it had cost her, that made her different from many in the field. The distinction between targets and innocents was never just black and white. It was gray. It was messy. It was human. And that knowledge made her sharp, ruthless when necessary, but also painfully aware of what could be lost if she made the wrong choice. The team departed under the cover of night. The wind bit through layers of tactical gear, and the mountain pass creaked under their boots. Mara moved with a predator's grace, every sense alert, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a signal. Her earpiece crackled occasionally, voices giving updates she hardly needed. She had been here before in similar terrain, but each mission carried its own heartbeat, its own rhythm of fear and anticipation. The helicopter hummed like a low, steady drum. Mara looked out the window at the patchwork of forests and rocky outcrops below. The moonlight caught on her face, highlighting the set of her jaw and the determination in her eyes. No one on the ground knew the story she carried, the sleepless nights, the moments she'd spent questioning herself, the times she'd let guilt carve hollows into her chest. She carried all of it silently, as if the weight itself lent her power. She had learned early that vulnerability was a luxury in war, but strength, she realized, could be silent, unseen, unyielding. First obstacle appeared sooner than expected. A landslide, remnants of a spring thaw, blocked the narrow path they were meant to use for insertion. The team debated reroute, risk exposure, wait for extraction. Mara's hand hovered over the map projected on her tablet. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she listened. Felt the terrain, visualized the steps, calculated the odds. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was low, deliberate, precise. "We go over the ridge. It's riskier, yes. But it keeps the element of surprise. We move fast, minimal exposure." Her teammates hesitated. A few wanted more discussion, more consensus. But Mara had always been like this, calm in chaos, deliberate when everyone else felt panic creeping up their spines. And slowly they nodded, following her lead. In war, hesitation could be fatal. She understood that better than anyone. As they climbed, Mara's mind wandered to the personal stakes she rarely voiced. Her younger brother, Alex, had enlisted a year ago. He believed in heroism, in the glory of service. Mara believed in survival. She believed in finishing the mission and coming home intact, something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for in years. There was a secret she carried, too, tucked behind her stern exterior. She had failed a mission once. Not a small failure. A life was lost because of a miscalculation, a hesitation. She never let anyone know which life, and she never would. But the memory gnawed at her during every night operation, every quiet moment before dawn. The ridge loomed ahead. Cold seeped through her gloves. Every breath drew in the scent of wet stone, pine sap, and distant smoke. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the terrain. Movement in the shadows, a dog, or worse, a scout. Mara's hand went instinctively to her rifle, but she didn't fire. She waited, she watched, she breathed. She remembered a lesson from her first deployment: patience was a weapon, impulsiveness a death sentence. Hours passed, measured in silent steps and muffled communication. The village slowly revealed itself through breaks in the foliage, smoke curling from chimneys, the faint glow of lanterns, the distant laughter of children playing in the dirt streets. Mara felt her heart tighten. They were living their lives, unaware of the storm about to descend. She thought of her own childhood, of moments of laughter and sunlight now buried under years of duty and responsibility. The juxtaposition made her chest ache. She had learned to compartmentalize. But tonight, the weight of empathy pressed heavily, reminding her that war was never just about strategy. It was about people. The team reached the outskirts. Mara surveyed every roofline, every alleyway, every shadow where danger could hide. She whispered coordinates to Logan, a soft but sharp murmur that cut through the tension. "Left flank, 3 meters from the well, watch for the signals." They moved as one, synchronized, disciplined. Mara's silence remained her most potent weapon. Words could betray. Silence concealed, sharpened, protected. Yet even in her precision, doubts lingered. She wondered if her decisions would truly keep her team safe. She wondered if the civilian lives they sought to protect could be preserved, or if collateral damage was inevitable. She carried these questions like stones in her pocket, heavy, unyielding, impossible to ignore. But she didn't let them show. She had learned that doubt was a companion, not a weakness. The ability to act despite doubt was strength. Night deepened. Stars glimmered cold and distant above the mountains. Mara found a vantage point, crouched behind a crumbling wall, and surveyed the village. The hum of insects, the occasional bark of a dog, and the wind whispering through pine needles filled the silence. Her team hunkered in the shadows, waiting for her signal. And then she saw it: movement. Subtle, deliberate, unnervingly precise. Mara's pulse quickened, but her expression didn't change. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Her mind cataloged possibilities. Enemy operative, civilian, trap. She held her breath, letting the night teach her patience once more. Finally, she exhaled slowly. The figure disappeared behind a building. She nodded once to Logan. "We proceed, careful, eyes sharp." For Mara, the mission wasn't just about neutralizing threats. It was about navigating the moral tightrope of survival, empathy, and duty. Every step forward was a negotiation between instinct and conscience. She had learned to embrace the tension, the uncertainty, and the silence. For tonight, that silence was her shield, her strategy, and her unspoken command. Sometimes, she thought, dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in the shadows of that mountain village, Mara Ellison moved like a ghost, unseen, relentless, unshakable. Why did the hairs on the back of her neck rise before she even heard the first sound? The village was quiet, almost unnaturally so, as if it were holding its breath. Mara crouched behind a shattered wall, the cold seeping through her gloves, the metal of her rifle comforting against her shoulder. She had been in situations like this before, missions where the air itself seemed conspiratorial, waiting for a misstep. Yet tonight felt different. Something was off, subtle, almost imperceptible. The team moved in tight formation, each step synchronized like a heartbeat. Logan whispered a check-in, a quiet murmur she barely heard through her earpiece. Alpha clear, Bravo moving. Her mind cataloged the movements of each teammate, nodding tension in their shoulders, the small tremor in a finger. They trusted her, relied on her, but she carried the weight of their lives with a gravity no one else could see. Mara's eyes caught a flicker near the corner of the marketplace, a shadow crossing in a way that seemed deliberate. Her pulse quickened imperceptibly. She did not raise her weapon immediately. She never did. First, she observed. She catalogued. She imagined the worst and calculated the consequences of each action. The shadow moved again, and her instincts screamed caution. This was the moment where lives were won or lost in a breath. She remembered a lesson from her early days in sniper training. Every movement tells a story. Every hesitation broadcasts a weakness. Mara had learned to read people, to read environments, to read the silent narrative that others ignored. She didn't flinch. She simply absorbed the information, committing it to memory like a secret map. The shadow faded behind a building, and she exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her body just enough to maintain control. Her mind wandered briefly to the brother she had left behind. Alex, who believed in heroism, who didn't understand that survival often demanded a quiet ferocity. She wondered if he thought she was reckless or brave, perhaps both. She remembered their last conversation, a mix of pride, fear, and frustration, and the pang of guilt hit her like a silent bullet. She could not let that weight paralyze her. Not here, not now. The team advanced. Mara led the way through narrow alleys, the remnants of buildings casting jagged shadows in the moonlight. Every footstep was deliberate, every breath measured. The smell of wet earth and smoke clung to her senses, mingling with the faint scent of cooking fires from the village. For a moment, she allowed herself a flicker of empathy, imagining the people inside those homes, living lives oblivious to the storm of duty about to touch them. Then came the first indication that the village was not entirely dormant. A dog barked somewhere, sharp and sudden, breaking the fragile silence. Mara froze. Logan paused, glancing at her for direction. She raised a hand, a silent command, and the team halted. The dog barked again, closer this time, and she realized that the small, instinctive disruptions, a barking dog, a creaking shutter, were part of the rhythm she had to navigate. Patience, observation, and empathy were as critical as firepower. Her thoughts drifted back to a failure she rarely revisited. A mission years prior, a civilian casualty, a mistake that could never be undone. The memory was a ghost she carried silently, an invisible scar that guided her decisions now. She could not let history repeat itself. Every step, every shot, every whispered instruction was measured against that moment, ensuring she would not repeat the same error. The village square came into view. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and Mara's gut tightened. She noticed the subtle signs others missed: footprints leading to side streets, a discarded scarf fluttering in the breeze, the faint glint of metal under a broken roof tile. These small details were the difference between life and death, between success and failure. Mara cataloged everything, storing the information, waiting for the right moment to act. Then came the sound of voices, hushed, urgent, and unmistakably not part of the villagers' evening routines. Mara crouched lower, her breath steady, her eyes scanning. There were 3 figures near a supply hut, moving with practiced precision. Enemy operatives, she realized instantly. They hadn't noticed the team yet. She felt a surge of adrenaline but maintained the outward calm that had become her armor. Inside, her chest tightened with that familiar tension, the awareness that this moment could spiral into chaos with a single misstep. She signaled to Logan. 2 subtle taps on the shoulder, a slight tilt of her head. They understood. Mara edged closer to the nearest vantage point, moving like a shadow, blending with the darkness. Her mind calculated trajectories, distances, and potential escape routes. She felt the weight of responsibility heavier than her rifle, heavier than the gear on her back. Each life, her teammates, the villagers, even the operatives, was a variable in an equation that demanded precision, patience, and moral clarity. Mara thought about what brought her here beyond duty or orders. The faces of those who mattered, her mother's quiet strength, her father's distant approval, Alex's idealistic courage, all of them were part of her internal compass. She could not fail them, not this time. The mistakes of the past were a constant whisper in her ear, reminding her that silence was not only a tool but a safeguard. In this mission, words could betray. Only actions could define her. She assessed the operatives again. Their movements were methodical but not flawless. Mara identified the gaps, a small window of opportunity. She whispered coordinates to Logan, who acknowledged with a barely perceptible nod. They would move simultaneously. Distraction here, positioning there. Mara's strategy was not about heroics. It was about ensuring every life under her watch had a chance to survive. A sudden noise startled a cat, sending it darting across the cobblestones. One of the operatives glanced up. Mara held her breath. Logan's hand steadied on the rifle, a mirrored calm in a storm of tension. Mara focused, filtering out everything but the immediate task. Her inner dialogue was a silent prayer, not to any deity, but to the principles she had lived by: precision, patience, empathy, survival. The operatives moved closer to the supply hut. Mara adjusted her position, aligning the rifle. She noticed a detail that could make the difference, a loose board that would reveal her if disturbed. She shifted, minuscule adjustments, muscles trained to the point of instinct. Time seemed to stretch, each second a mile, each heartbeat a drumbeat of inevitability. Then came the first engagement, a non-lethal takedown executed with the precision only Mara could achieve. The operatives froze, momentarily disoriented, giving Logan the opening to neutralize the threat without unnecessary harm. Mara's pulse remained steady outwardly, but inside, a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety coursed through her. They had survived the first test, but the mission was far from over. The aftermath left her reflective. She observed the operatives' faces, saw fleeting flashes of fear, regret, humanity. It reminded her of herself, the constant tension between duty and conscience. She felt the weight of every decision pressing against her chest. The mission demanded detachment, but her humanity resisted erasure. She had learned that true strength was not the absence of emotion but the mastery of it. Her team regrouped behind cover. Logan glanced at her, an unspoken question in his eyes. Mara shook her head slightly, a gesture that conveyed both reassurance and command. They pressed on, deeper into the village, where danger and moral complexity awaited in equal measure. Every step was a negotiation between instinct and ethics, between survival and compassion. Mara moved forward with silent determination, carrying the invisible scars of the past and the unyielding resolve to act with precision and conscience. The village seemed to hold its breath as they advanced. Mara's mind replayed lessons from previous missions: patience, observation, empathy. Each detail mattered: the positioning of a weapon, the angle of a window, the faint odor of smoke or food. Mara processed these sensory inputs with the acuity of someone who had lived through mistakes and carried their consequences silently, like a ledger of lives she could never forget. As they neared the central courtyard, Mara noticed the subtle signs of an ambush: a partially obscured passageway, footprints that led to cover, a faint glint of metal. Her instincts screamed caution. She whispered new instructions to Logan, adjusting their formation to account for the hidden threat. Her voice was barely audible, but her authority was absolute. The team moved as extensions of her will, trusting her judgment even when the danger was unseen. For Mara, this mission was not just about neutralizing enemies or protecting civilians. It was about reconciling the past with the present, about asserting control in a world where chaos was constant. Her silence remained her most potent weapon, shielding her vulnerabilities and sharpening her focus. She understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. And as the night deepened, Mara Ellison moved through the village with unwavering resolve, her presence a quiet command. Every heartbeat, every breath, every decision was deliberate. She had learned that dignity does not require words. It requires action, precision, and the quiet strength to carry the weight of consequences. Sometimes, she thought, the most powerful command is the one unspoken. Why did the child's laughter echo through the ruins just as silence had settled? Mara froze, heart tightening. It wasn't the laughter of a free, carefree child. It was brittle, forced, a sound that didn't belong in a place so dangerous, so tense. The village held secrets, and she had learned early in her career that innocence could sometimes be the loudest warning. She scanned the courtyard, eyes narrowing on a shadow beneath the rubble. Logan shifted beside her, sensing the pause. Mara didn't speak. She never did, not unless it was necessary. Her silence was a shield for herself, for the team, and sometimes for the world. She noticed the smallest details, the way the dust swirled, the rhythm of footsteps behind walls, the faint metallic scent of tension in the air. Her mind cataloged it all. Every piece of information mattered. Every second could tip the balance between life and death. The child stepped forward hesitantly, clutching a ragged doll. Mara's heart clenched in a way that startled her. She had buried memories of children she could not save, faces that haunted her, soft whispers of a world that demanded her vigilance while punishing her humanity. This child was a reminder, an unintentional mirror. She had to protect, yet she had to move. Every instinct screamed both directions. She signaled Logan to hold position. He nodded, reading the silent language she had perfected over years of missions. Mara edged forward, rifle lowered but ready, senses sharpened to an almost unbearable degree. The child's eyes met hers, wide and untrusting, yet strangely knowing. Mara realized that fear wasn't always visible. Sometimes it was the quiet stillness between breaths, the way the body tensed in anticipation of a threat unseen. Her own body mirrored that tension. Years of missions had taught her to compartmentalize, but moments like this breached her defenses. She remembered Alex, her younger brother, and the arguments they had over heroism. He believed courage was a visible flame. She had learned it was often a quiet ember, glowing fiercely beneath the surface. Suddenly, a noise, distant, muffled, almost drowned by the child's tentative steps, drew Mara's attention. Footsteps, deliberate, measured, moving through the alleyways surrounding the courtyard. Enemy reinforcements. She cursed under her breath, silently, her mind racing through options. She could not risk the child, but she could not abandon the mission. Every decision felt like a moral calculus, an equation she could never fully solve. She crouched lower, motioning the child to follow. "It's okay," she whispered softly, though the words were mostly for her own grounding. The doll shifted in the child's hands, and Mara noted how human small gestures could feel, fragile and unassuming but full of meaning. She guided the child behind a half-collapsed wall, her movements deliberate, protective. She felt the weight of responsibility heavier than any weapon, heavier than the gear strapped across her body. Logan moved beside her, eyes scanning, ears listening. Mara felt a brief flicker of relief, his presence a reminder that she was not entirely alone. Yet the tension in the air was palpable. Every step, every decision carried consequences beyond their immediate understanding. Mara's internal dialogue was a constant murmur. Protect, observe, calculate, empathize. Never rush, never falter. Her mind drifted briefly to her past, to training missions, to mistakes she had made, to moments of quiet triumph that no one had ever witnessed. She remembered one particular night, years ago, lying awake in a tent while the desert wind carried the distant sounds of conflict. She had made a mistake that nearly cost a life. The memory was a sharp reminder that perfection was impossible, but relentless effort and empathy could mitigate error. The footsteps drew closer. Mara peeked around the edge of the wall, three figures armed moving with caution. They hadn't noticed her yet. She scanned for vantage points, escape routes, and cover. Every detail mattered: the glint of a metal buckle, the sway of a loose strap, the whisper of fabric against wood. Her fingers itched to engage, to act, but she restrained herself. Patience was her ally, silence her weapon. The child's small hand brushed against Mara's. She felt a jolt of raw emotion, protective, anxious, yet resolute. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions. She had to be the anchor in a storm of chaos. Her training and her past intertwined, creating a discipline that was both rigid and fluid, precise yet adaptable. She moved the child behind a larger piece of debris, crouched low, and assessed the situation anew. Mara's thoughts wandered to the family she had left behind: her mother, who always worried silently; Alex, who still believed in her visible heroism; and the memory of her father's distant approval. These personal threads intertwined with her professional mission, reminding her that the stakes were not abstract. Every life she protected, every decision she made, carried echoes of the people she loved and the people she had lost. The operatives paused, scanning their surroundings. One muttered something inaudible, and Mara's heart leapt. This was the moment where instinct collided with morality. She could engage, neutralize the threat swiftly, but the proximity of the child complicated every decision. Her rifle's scope framed one of the figures, and for a fraction of a second, she felt the pull of familiar tension, the potential for violence versus the imperative to protect innocence. She adjusted her position, whispering to Logan, "Hold, wait." The words were almost lost in the night, but he understood. They had moved together long enough to communicate without sound, a shared language born of countless operations and mutual trust. Mara's silence was not weakness, it was strategy. It was control. It was the careful choreography of life and death, morality and necessity. Time stretched, elongated by anticipation. The operatives moved again, unknowingly steering toward a trap Mara had visualized but not yet enacted. She calculated trajectories, escape vectors, and fallback positions. The child shifted, and she placed a gentle hand on the small shoulder, grounding both of them. She whispered internally, "Remain calm. Remain deliberate. Protect. Observe. Decide." Her mind revisited old lessons from mentors, from colleagues, from mistakes she would never allow herself to forget. Compassion and precision were not opposites. They were complementary forces, each sharpening the other. Mara felt the weight of those lessons in every breath, every heartbeat, every measured glance. She had learned that silence could speak louder than commands, that restraint could be a weapon, that observation could be salvation. Then came the first engagement of the night, non-lethal, precise, deliberate. The operatives froze, disoriented, and Mara's team capitalized on the opening. They subdued the threat without unnecessary harm, demonstrating the delicate balance between force and morality that Mara had cultivated through years of experience. Relief mixed with lingering anxiety, a constant companion she had learned to carry without allowing it to define her actions. Afterward, Mara surveyed the scene, noting small human details in the subdued operatives' expressions: fear, regret, fleeting confusion. She felt the familiar tug of empathy, a reminder that humanity existed even in those who opposed her. Logan moved closer, checking the child's position, and Mara allowed herself a fleeting smile. The immediate danger was over, but the mission was far from complete. She guided the child to a safer location within the village, her movements deliberate and protective. Each step was a negotiation between the imperatives of the mission and the moral responsibility she bore. She had learned that true courage was not reckless heroism, but the quiet mastery of decisions under pressure, the ability to act with precision and conscience in a chaotic world. As they regrouped, Mara reflected on the lessons of the night. Observation, patience, empathy, These were not abstract ideals but tools of survival. Her silence remained her most potent weapon, shielding vulnerability while allowing clarity of action. She knew that every life she protected carried echoes of the past, mistakes she could not undo, victories she could scarcely acknowledge, responsibilities she could never shirk. The child's hand remained in hers, a fragile tether to innocence and hope. Mara felt a surge of protectiveness and pride, tempered by the ever-present tension of the mission. She whispered silently, as much to herself as to the night, "Survival is not just about action. It is about restraint. It is about compassion. It is about choosing in every moment to act with purpose and integrity." Mara's eyes swept the village once more. The shadows remained restless, the night thick with uncertainty, but she moved forward with unwavering resolve. Every decision, every silent command, every protective gesture was an affirmation of her principles. She had learned that dignity does not demand words. It demands action, patience, and the quiet strength to carry the weight of consequences without faltering. Sometimes the most powerful command is the one left unspoken, the one enacted with deliberate care in the silence of night. Mara understood this better than anyone, and as she led the team and the child toward the next stage of the mission, she carried that understanding like a shield, unseen, unyielding, and essential. Why did silence sometimes feel heavier than gunfire? Mara led the team deeper into the village, the child's hand still curled around hers. She hadn't expected that, to be tethered in such a fragile way mid-mission, as if the night itself had offered her a reminder of what was at stake. The boy's eyes were wide, reflecting both trust and fear, and Mara felt a pang that reached deeper than any wound she had ever taken in the field. The team regrouped behind a collapsed barn. Logan was the first to break the quiet, whispering, "We can't keep him with us, Cap. He'll slow us down." His voice was low, respectful, but laced with the urgency of experience. Mara didn't answer immediately. She studied the boy, the way he clutched the doll, the subtle tremble in his thin shoulders, the dirt caked under his fingernails. A child dragged into the theater of war he never asked for. She felt her throat tighten. "We don't leave him," she murmured finally, her voice steady but hushed. Logan exhaled sharply but didn't argue. He knew better. Mara's silence carried more weight than most commanders' speeches. She crouched down, meeting the boy's gaze. Her voice softened, words careful, deliberate. "Safe. Stay close." She mimed walking, pointed to her chest. The boy nodded, eyes locked on hers with a trust she wasn't sure she deserved. And yet in that moment she accepted it like a vow. The mission pressed on. Every step through the narrow alleys was a negotiation with danger. The smell of smoke grew sharper, mingling with the acrid tang of fuel. Somewhere in the distance, metal scraped against stone. Mara's senses sharpened, not with panic, but with the controlled focus that had kept her alive through missions others hadn't returned from. Her mind flickered back to Alex. He would have been proud of her in that moment, protecting a child, embodying the visible heroism he believed in. But Mara's chest tightened with unease. She knew Alex didn't understand the full truth. Heroism wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet decisions made in silence, burdens carried alone, compromises etched into the soul. If Alex ever saw the weight she carried, the ghosts, would he still believe in her? They reached a vantage point overlooking the central square. From here, the truth revealed itself. Enemy forces had set up a command post near the schoolhouse. Crates of weapons, communications equipment, guards moving with restless precision. And worst of all, villagers forced to serve, or perhaps simply trapped, sitting in the corners, eyes vacant, bodies rigid with fear. Logan muttered, "Damn, they've turned the whole place into a staging ground." Mara didn't respond. Her silence was not indecision but calculation. She studied the layout, tracing paths, imagining the flow of action before it began. Her rifle scope revealed details others missed. The nervous twitch of a young guard's hand, the exhaustion etched into a villager's posture, the faint shimmer of a tripwire near the schoolhouse door. Every detail mattered. The boy tugged at her sleeve, whispering in his language words she didn't fully understand. But she caught one. Home, her heart clenched. Home. A word that felt foreign to her, a place she carried more in memory than reality. She nodded gently, pressing a finger to her lips, promising silence, safety. But inside, she wondered if she was lying. Could she really promise survival in a place where death lurked in every shadow? Her team waited for her signal. Mara's breathing slowed, heartbeat steady. She knew what had to be done: secure the civilians, dismantle the command post, extract without unnecessary bloodshed. But she also knew that plans never survived first contact with chaos. She had to be ready to adapt, to bend without breaking. Then a sound, a cough, soft, human, but enough to ripple through the silence. One of the villagers had shifted, drawing a guard's attention. The boy in Mara's arms stiffened. The guard barked an order, stepping closer, hand drifting toward his weapon. Mara's mind raced. Engage now and risk exposing the team. Hold position and risk a civilian being hurt. Each option felt like a blade pressed against her skin. She chose restraint, signaling her team to stay low. The guard muttered, then moved on. The moment passed, but the weight of it lingered in Mara's chest like a stone. Her thoughts drifted to a memory she had buried, her first deployment, when hesitation had cost a man's life. She had promised herself never again. Never again would indecision be the reason someone died. And yet, tonight, she hesitated. Was it restraint? Or was it the same fear that had haunted her for years? The team repositioned, moving toward the schoolhouse. Mara took point, every muscle coiled, every sense alert. The boy clung to Logan now, small arms wrapped around the soldier's neck, eyes darting nervously. Logan caught Mara's glance. His expression said everything. We can't carry him forever. Mara looked away. Some burdens weren't negotiable. Inside the schoolhouse, the air was thick with tension. Desks overturned, chalkboards shattered, walls pockmarked with bullet holes. This was no longer a place of learning, it was a fortress. Mara's eyes swept the room, cataloging threats. 2 guards, radios, a map spread across a desk. And on that map, red marks, circles, plans for future operations. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't just about one village, it was bigger. Logan whispered, "We grab intel, secure civilians, exfil, clean and quick." But Mara's gaze lingered on the map. She thought of Alex, of soldiers like him who would be walking into whatever was planned here. She thought of the villagers, trapped between forces they couldn't control. She thought of herself, of the endless cycle of missions, losses, ghosts. Her silence deepened, heavier now, as if carrying the weight of every life the map represented. She moved forward, quietly signaling the takedown. It was swift, efficient, silent. The guards subdued before they had a chance to cry out. Mara secured the map, folding it into her vest. The civilians inside the schoolhouse looked up at her with hollow eyes. She met their gazes briefly, searching for humanity in the wreckage of fear. She found it faint, fragile, but still there. Then came the unexpected. A radio crackled, static hissing. Enemy reinforcements inbound. Minutes, maybe less. Mara's chest tightened. They didn't have time to escort every villager out safely. The calculus was brutal, unforgiving. Do they prioritize the mission, the intel, or the people? She looked at the boy, clutching the doll. His eyes met hers again, and she felt the world narrow to a single, impossible point. Duty versus humanity. Mission versus morality. Her silence was no longer strategy, it was survival. Every choice screamed consequences. Logan whispered urgently, "Cap, what's the call?" Mara closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. She thought of Alex, of the life she wanted him to live, one where choices weren't this cruel. She thought of the civilians, of her vow never to repeat the mistakes of her past. And she thought of herself, of the endless silence she carried, and how maybe, just maybe, tonight it had to mean more than survival. Her eyes opened, steady, unshakable. She gave the command not with words but with the sharpness of her hand signal. Protect the villagers. Extract them first. The team moved, no hesitation. Mara took the rear, her rifle raised, every nerve burning with anticipation. She knew reinforcements were closing in. She knew the decision could cost her. But for the first time in a long time, she felt clarity. Silence wasn't weakness. It wasn't retreat. It was the space between fear and courage, between duty and humanity. It was her unshakable command. As the villagers began to move under her protection, Mara breathed deeply, steadying herself for what came next. The night was far from over, and the storm had only begun to break. Why did the night suddenly feel alive, like every shadow was holding its breath? Mara crouched in the ruined doorway of the schoolhouse, rifle steady, eyes fixed on the narrow street that funneled toward them. She could already sense it, the rhythm of boots against stone, the faint metallic clatter of weapons, the approaching storm of reinforcements. The villagers huddled close, silent but trembling. A woman clutched her child to her chest. An old man stared blankly at the ground, his shoulders shaking with a grief he hadn't spoken aloud. Mara saw all of it, every gesture, every breath, every silent plea, and she felt her chest tighten with a responsibility that weighed heavier than the rifle in her hands. Logan crouched beside her, whispering low, "Cap, they'll be here in less than 5. If we're going to move, it's now." Her jaw clenched. He wasn't wrong, but moving now meant exposure. Staying meant being cornered. Both options were blades pressed to her throat. She closed her eyes briefly, listening. The footsteps drew nearer, deliberate and coordinated. Trained soldiers, not opportunistic fighters. Reinforcements. Mara exhaled slowly, her silence speaking louder than any rushed words could. She tapped Logan's arm twice, signaling patience. He frowned but nodded. He knew her well enough to understand. She never gambled without reading every angle, and right now she was still reading. The boy clung to Logan's vest, eyes wide with fear. Mara glanced at him, and in that instant a memory surfaced. Alex at 10 years old, standing in their small kitchen, gripping her sleeve the same way before she left for basic training. He had begged her not to go. She had smiled, promised she would be fine. That memory burned now, sharper than any scar. She had left him with words. Tonight she had none, only actions. The reinforcements came into view. 4, then 6, then more. Mara's pulse quickened, though her face remained unreadable. The streetlights flickered dimly, casting long shadows that distorted movement. She counted weapons, body language, scanning for weaknesses. Her silence stretched into a hum, a low thrumming in her chest that steadied her hands. She whispered into her mic, barely audible. 2 teams split. Logan, take the civilians out back. North alley, quiet fast, I'll cover. There was hesitation. Logan whispered back, that's suicide. Her eyes never left the advancing soldiers. She didn't answer, didn't argue. Her silence was command enough. Logan exhaled sharply, frustration laced with reluctant respect. He signaled the others, gathering the civilians. The boy resisted for a moment, eyes locked on Mara, unwilling to let go. She gave him a small nod, the faintest promise that she would follow. Eventually. The first shots cracked the night. Mara's rifle barked once, twice, precise and devastating. The reinforcements scattered, shouting, ducking behind cover. She shifted positions fluidly, never staying in one place long enough to be pinned. Each shot was measured, not wasted. The silence between them was as sharp as the gunfire itself, commanding the rhythm of the fight. But numbers pressed in. The enemy wasn't reckless. They were deliberate, sweeping methodically. Mara knew she couldn't hold forever. Her role wasn't victory. It was time. Time for the civilians to vanish into the night, time for her team to lead them out of danger. Every second she bought came at the cost of risk she carried alone. Her chest ached with controlled breaths. Sweat stung her eyes, though the mountain air was cold. She shifted behind a wall as bullets splintered the wood, shards slicing her cheek. Pain flared, but she pushed it down. Pain was information, not weakness. The radio crackled. Logan's voice, urgent but steady. Civilians are moving, 2 minutes out, hold if you can. She smirked faintly despite the chaos. If you can. There was no if. She would. Her rifle thundered again, echoing through the narrow streets. The reinforcements hesitated, regrouping. Mara used that moment to breathe, to recenter. Her thoughts drifted unbidden to Alex. Was he out there somewhere tonight on his own mission, feeling the same pounding rhythm of survival? Was he carrying his own silence, his own ghosts? The thought both terrified and comforted her. She wanted him far from this world, yet she knew he had already chosen it. The enemy advanced again, pushing hard. Mara ducked into a side corridor, sliding into position behind a crumbling pillar. She reached for a smoke grenade, pulled the pin, and let the thick cloud blanket the street. Confusion erupted, shouts, footsteps scattering. She used the chaos to slip into another position, her movements fluid, practiced. But even as she fought, even as she moved like a shadow, the weight of her choice pressed on her. She had stayed behind, alone, again. This was her pattern, her curse. To hold the line so others could escape. To choose silence over recognition, solitude over survival together. She wondered fleetingly if this was her fate, to always be the one who stayed behind. Her rifle clicked empty. She reloaded smoothly, hands steady despite the racing of her heart. But the reinforcements were closing the circle. The silence around her fractured into chaos, gunfire, shouting, the crack of breaking stone. And through it all, Mara remained steady, her silence a center point in the storm. One enemy moved too close. Mara shifted, hand flashing to her knife. The fight was swift, brutal, silent. She felt the warmth of blood on her gloves, the ragged breath of a man who had chosen the wrong shadow. She closed his eyes before slipping back into the night. Humanity and brutality lived side by side inside her, and she bore the contradiction without flinching. Her earpiece crackled again. Logan's voice lower this time. "We've got them safe. Where are you?" She didn't answer, her silence stretched. Logan's voice cracked with urgency. "Mara, don't do this alone." But she already had. She had chosen. She peeked from cover, scanned the shifting reinforcements, and mapped her next move. Her thoughts drifted again, unbidden. To her mother, waiting by the phone for news that never came fast enough. To Alex, idolizing a version of her that never truly existed. To the faces of comrades she had lost, voices that would never laugh or curse or complain again. She carried them all. They whispered in her silence, reminding her why she fought, why she stayed. The reinforcements regrouped once more, stronger now, pressing harder. Mara knew she was running out of time. Her body screamed fatigue, muscles trembling, lungs burning. But her eyes stayed sharp, unyielding. She whispered almost to herself, "Not yet." And then a sound, not enemy, not civilian. A faint whistle, deliberate, familiar. Logan. Cover fire ripped from the north alley. Mara blinked, surprised. He had come back. Figures moved in the shadows, her team. They'd left the civilians further with another escort and returned for her. Logan's voice hissed in her earpiece. "You didn't think we'd just leave you, did you?" For the first time that night, Mara smiled, just slightly. She whispered back, "You should have." But in truth, she felt the warmth of their loyalty cut through the cold silence she carried. She was not as alone as she believed. Maybe she never had been. Together they fought their way out step by step, shadow by shadow, gunfire echoing like a heartbeat in the dark. Mara covered the rear as always, but this time she wasn't holding the line alone. Logan was beside her, steady and relentless, his presence anchoring her resolve. By the time they reached the outer ridge, dawn was bleeding into the sky. The horizon glowed faintly, pink and gold against the black silhouette of the mountains. The villagers were safe, the intel secured, and Mara, she was still standing. But her silence lingered, heavy, reflective. She thought of the choices she had made, the line she had walked between mission and morality, between solitude and connection. And though she never spoke it aloud, she felt the truth deep in her chest. Silence had not been weakness tonight. It had been endurance, discipline, command. As the first rays of sunlight touched her face, Mara exhaled slowly, watching the night retreat. She whispered inwardly, to the ghost she carried, to the boy she had protected, to Alex somewhere out there in his own fight. Sometimes silence isn't the absence of words. It's the presence of everything you can't afford to lose. Why did victory feel so heavy? The sun had risen, washing the mountains in muted gold, but for Mara, light brought no relief. She sat on a rock ledge overlooking the valley, helmet at her side, rifle across her knees. Her breathing was slow, controlled, though every muscle ached. The battle was over, but her silence lingered, thicker than the smoke curling from the distant village below. The villagers were safe. The map was secured. By every measure, the mission was a success. Yet Mara felt the weight of something unresolved pressing against her ribs. She had survived again, but survival didn't feel like triumph. It felt like debt. Logan approached quietly, canteen in hand. He lowered himself onto the rock beside her, offering it without a word. She took it, drank slowly, then set it between them. Neither spoke at first. Their silence was not awkward but shared, a language of its own. Finally, Logan broke it. "You should have come with us back there. You stayed too long." Mara didn't answer. She knew he wasn't wrong, but she also knew there had never really been a choice. He studied her profile, the scar across her cheek from the splintered wall, the tightness around her eyes. "You always do this. Hold the line. Alone. Why?" She turned her gaze toward the horizon. The morning mist clung to the ridges, soft and deceptive. It looked peaceful, but Mara knew how quickly peace could fracture. She let the silence stretch, not because she had nothing to say, but because words felt fragile. Finally she spoke, voice low, "Someone has to." Logan exhaled, shaking his head. "That's not an answer." She didn't respond. Moments later, the boy appeared, clutching his battered doll, eyes searching until they landed on Mara. He ran to her, wrapping small arms around her side. Mara froze briefly, then rested a gloved hand on his back. His heartbeat was rapid but steadying against her. Logan watched the exchange, his expression softening. "He trusts you more than anyone." Mara looked down at the boy, her throat tightening. She wanted to believe that trust was earned, not misplaced, but trust was a fragile thing. She had seen it broken too many times in too many places. She wondered if she deserved it. The team regrouped further down the ridge. Equipment was checked, weapons cleaned, wounds bandaged. There was a rhythm to the aftermath, a ritual of recovery that hid the deeper scars. Soldiers swapped quick words, sometimes jokes, sometimes confessions. Each carried their own ghosts, their own weight. One of the younger soldiers, Tors, sat apart, staring at his hands. He had taken a life for the first time the night before. Mara knew that look, the hollow disbelief, the silent reckoning. She approached quietly, crouching beside him. He didn't look at her. I thought it'd feel different." Mara stayed silent, giving him space. Tors swallowed hard. "It doesn't feel like winning, it just feels empty." Mara's voice was steady, quiet. "It's supposed to. The moment it feels easy, that's when you've lost something you don't get back." He finally looked at her, eyes red-rimmed but searching. "Does it ever get better?" She met his gaze, and for a moment Alex's face flashed in her mind. Younger, idealistic, untouched by the truths she carried. She thought of the promises she had once made to him, promises to return, to stay human, to never let the silence consume her. Promises she wasn't sure she had kept. Her answer to Tors was soft, honest. "You learn to carry it, that's all." Tors nodded, though the weight in his shoulders didn't lift. Mara didn't expect it to. Some lessons were not comforts but anchors. Later, when the team moved toward the extraction point, Mara walked at the rear. Her eyes scanned the ridges, always watching, always guarding. But inside, her thoughts drifted again to Alex. She remembered the last time they had spoken before his first deployment. His excitement had been contagious, his belief unshakable. He had called her his hero. The memory cut deep. He didn't see the ghosts. He didn't hear the screams that echoed in the silence. He didn't feel the burden of choosing who lived and who didn't. He only saw the uniform, the medals, the stories she never told. She wondered if his silence now, the absence of recent letters, the missed calls, was his way of beginning to understand. By nightfall, they reached the extraction zone. A helicopter thumped in the distance, growing louder as it cut through the mountain air. The team prepared quickly, securing gear, guiding the villagers on board. The boy hesitated, eyes fixed on Mara, unwilling to board without her. She crouched down, meeting his gaze. Her hand rested on his shoulder. "Go, safe now." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, clutching the doll tighter as he stepped onto the helicopter. Mara watched him disappear inside, her chest heavy with both relief and ache. As the rotors roared, Logan touched her arm. "Coming." Mara hesitated. The mission was over. The villagers were safe, but her silence wasn't done speaking. She turned, scanning the darkening valley one last time as if searching for something left unfinished. Finally, she stepped onto the helicopter. The team settled in, exhaustion written across every face. The noise of the rotors filled the air, but Mara's thoughts drowned it out. She leaned her head back, eyes closing. The boy's trust, Tor's question, Logan's frustration, Alex's memory, all of it swirled inside her, unresolved, demanding. Her silence held it together like armor, but she knew armor cracked eventually. As the helicopter lifted, carrying them away from the village, Mara opened her eyes to the fading horizon. The mountains receded, swallowed by night. She whispered inwardly, to herself, to Alex, to the ghosts. Every choice costs something. Every silence carries a weight. The question is, how much can one person carry before it breaks them? The question lingered, unanswered, as the helicopter vanished into the dark. Why did quiet rooms sometimes feel louder than battlefields? Mara sat in the debriefing chamber hours after extraction, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the air heavy with stale coffee and unspoken truths. Around her, soldiers filled out forms, answered clipped questions, replayed the mission in rehearsed fragments stripped of emotion. Success. Intel secured. Civilians rescued. Minimal losses. But numbers and words didn't tell the story. Not the real one. The story was written in the faces of the villagers, in Tor's hollow stare, in the way the boy's small hand had clung to hers as if silence itself could keep him safe. That wasn't on any form. Logan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Mara. He could tell she wasn't really in the room, not fully. She wrote the bare minimum on her report, each word deliberate, stripped of weight. Silence even here, her refusal to let paper carry what only her chest could. When the session ended, the others filed out, their footsteps echoing. Mara stayed seated a moment longer, staring at the blank section of the form marked comments. She left it empty. What could she write? That her silence was both shield and prison. That saving lives sometimes felt indistinguishable from losing pieces of herself. She closed the folder, pushing it away. Later in the barracks, the team let their armor drop. Jokes surfaced, dark humor easing tension. Tors lay on his bunk, headphones in, trying to drown his own thoughts. Logan cleaned his weapon meticulously, every stroke of the rag deliberate, his jaw tight. Mara sat apart, lacing her boots even though there was nowhere to go. Her hands worked automatically, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the mission, the boy's eyes, the moment she almost stayed behind for good. Her phone buzzed, a message. For a second her chest tightened with something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope, Alex. She opened it quickly. "Got your letter, don't worry about me. I'm good out here, really good. Doing what you always did, feels right, proud to follow your steps." Her stomach twisted, proud, that word again. She stared at the screen until the letters blurred. He didn't know. He couldn't know. The ghosts, the weight, the endless silence. He thought he was following a path lit by her strength, when in truth it was paved with scars she never wanted him to carry. She typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Finally, she shut the phone off, pressing it against her forehead, eyes closing, silence once more. Words felt like betrayal. The barracks quieted, soldiers drifting into restless sleep. Mara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Shadows shifted with the hum of the fluorescent light outside the door. She thought of the boy, safe now but carrying memories no child should. She thought of Tor's, whose hollow stare mirrored her own from years past. She thought of Alex, carrying an image of her that wasn't real. Her chest rose and fell slowly, but inside she was unraveling. For years, her silence had been armor, command, control. But tonight it felt brittle, cracks forming, the weight of all she carried pressing harder than the firefight ever had. The next day she found herself outside, the chill of early morning cutting into her skin. The air smelled of rain, heavy clouds gathering above. She liked storms. They made noise louder than her thoughts, gave her silence a place to hide. Logan found her there, standing by the fence line, eyes fixed on the horizon. He walked up quietly, hands in his pockets. "You don't talk much after missions," he said, not accusing, just observing. Mara didn't look at him. "Talking doesn't change what happened." "No," he agreed, "but it changes what happens to you." Her jaw tightened. She didn't respond. Logan studied her for a long moment. "You think silence keeps you strong. Maybe it does, but it also keeps you alone. One day you're gonna need more than just yourself." Mara turned then, her eyes sharp but tired. "And what happens when words fail, when they can't touch what's inside?" Logan held her gaze. "Then at least someone else knows you tried." His words lingered, uncomfortable but undeniable. Mara looked away, back toward the horizon, where the storm clouds were darkening. That afternoon, they were called in to review the intel. The map Mara had taken revealed planned strikes across multiple villages. Civilian zones, schools, hospitals. The kind of targets meant to break people from the inside out. Mara's stomach clenched as the commander traced lines across the board, outlining future missions. "Your team may be tasked again," the commander said. "We'll need precision. We'll need silence." His eyes flicked to Mara at that last word, as if recognizing it as her unspoken signature. She gave a curt nod, her face unreadable, but inside turmoil churned. Another mission, another cycle, another silence. How many more before she broke completely? That night she sat alone in the mess hall long after the others had gone. The hum of the refrigerators filled the space, the flicker of a lone bulb above casting uneven light. She opened her notebook, not the official reports but her private one, the one no one knew about. She began to write, short sentences, fragments, not for anyone else, not even for Alex, for herself. The boy's eyes, Tor's question, Logan's words, "My silence is cracking. I don't know if I can hold it much longer, but I have to, for them, for him." Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote the last line. "I don't want Alex to carry this silence. I'd rather it break me than him." She closed the notebook, pressing her palm against it, as if sealing the words inside. Outside, thunder rolled. Rain began to fall, tapping against the windows. Mara sat in the dim light, listening to the storm. For the first time in years, she felt close to breaking. But she also felt something else, something fragile flickering. The possibility that silence didn't have to be her prison. That maybe, just maybe, there was another way. The storm raged on, drowning out the hum of the lights, washing the night in sound. Mara leaned back, closing her eyes, letting the rain speak where she could not. And in that moment, she realized something she had never allowed herself to admit. Silence had carried her this far, but it might not carry her forever. Why did endings never feel like endings? Mara stood on the tarmac, wind whipping across the airfield as another helicopter lifted into the gray morning sky. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving puddles across the asphalt, reflections of soldiers moving briskly about their duties. She didn't move, didn't speak. She stood still, arms crossed over her vest, her silence deeper than the noise around her. To anyone passing, she looked unshakable, composed, but inside she was a storm of her own. The mission had ended, the civilians were safe. The intel had been passed up the chain, yet something inside her refused to let go. She thought of the boy clutching the doll, of Tors, his young eyes still searching for a way to carry the weight, of Logan, steady as ever, watching her with a mix of loyalty and frustration, and of Alex, always Alex, his words replaying in her mind, proud to follow your steps. She wasn't sure if that pride would survive the truth. Later in the briefing room, new assignments were laid out. More missions, more risks, more silences waiting to be filled. Mara listened, expression unreadable. She gave no resistance, no agreement. Just a nod, her silence interpreted as acceptance. That was the thing about silence. People always gave it meaning, even when it carried none. Afterward, Logan caught up to her in the corridor. His boots echoed against the polished floor. "They'll send us back out soon." She glanced at him but didn't answer. He sighed. "You can't keep doing this, Mara, carrying it all, pretending silence is enough." She paused, turning toward him. For a moment her eyes softened, the cracks in her armor visible. "Silence is the only thing they can't take from me." Logan studied her. "No, it's the only thing you won't give. There's a difference." She walked away before he could say more. His words stung because they were true. She had chosen silence again and again until it had become both her refuge and her chain. That night she found herself in the comms room. Empty, quiet, just the faint hum of equipment. She sat before the terminal, staring at the screen. She could send a message to Alex. Tell him the truth. Tell him what it really meant to carry silence. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She typed, "You don't know what you're walking into. It isn't pride, it isn't glory, it's ghosts, and they never leave." She stopped, deleted it. Her chest ached with the weight of words she couldn't give him. She tried again, "I'm proud of you. Stay strong, stay safe." She deleted that too. In the end, she left the screen blank, her silence speaking louder than anything she could send. She shut the terminal off, the dark reflection of her own face staring back at her. Days later, they deployed again. A different valley, a different target, but the same rhythm. Silence before chaos, chaos within silence. Mara moved like a shadow, unyielding, commanding without raising her voice. Her team followed. Civilians trusted. Enemies faltered. And through it all, her silence carried them. But something had shifted. Logan stayed closer to her now, watching not just her back but the cracks in her silence. Tors followed her lead with eyes that were older than his years, his own silence beginning to form, not yet as heavy as hers, but growing. Mara saw it and wondered if she was watching the cycle repeat. During the exfil, as the helicopter cut through the night, Logan leaned close, shouting over the roar. "One day your silence will break. You know that, right?" She met his gaze, calm but steady. "If it breaks on my terms." He shook his head, half a smile, half despair, but he didn't argue. Back at base, when the dust settled and the reports were written, Mara sat alone again. Same chair, same table, same silence. She opened her notebook, the private one, and wrote slowly, deliberately. "Silence isn't absence. It is choice. It is shield and it is weight. It protects what words can't. It carries what others shouldn't. It commands without shouting. And when the battlefield grows louder than thought itself, silence is the only voice that endures." She closed the notebook, resting her hand on it as if sealing the truth inside. That evening she walked to the edge of the airfield again. The horizon burned with the last light of the day, the sky streaked with fire and shadow. She breathed in, slow and deep, the air cool against her skin. Around her, the base buzzed with life, but within her there was stillness. She thought of Alex. She thought of the boy. She thought of every soldier, every civilian, every ghost whose silence now lived inside her. And she realized that silence wasn't the absence of voice. It was the act of holding pain, holding trust, holding lives that others would never know. For years, people had mistaken her silence for weakness, for hesitation, for coldness. But the battlefield had taught her something else. Silence was command. It was resolve. It was the one thing unshakable when everything else fractured. As the last light faded, Mara stood alone, the hum of distant rotors rising in the background. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was enough. And if anyone had been close enough to hear the unspoken truth that echoed inside her, it would have sounded like this. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was the battlefield's most unshakable command.